I had worked at Granite Ridge Construction for 37 years. Long enough to see men come and go, to watch green interns grow into foremen, and to feel the shape of every hammer and blueprint like extensions of my own hand. I'd been there longer than the CEO, longer than most of the middle managers, longer than the company's last 3 logos. The site trailer on the east lot smelled like coffee and sawdust when I walked in that Tuesday morning. It was the kind of morning I'd always loved, sunlight strong through the window blinds, blueprints spread over the conference table, and my thermos still warm in my hand. 11 days. That's all I had left until I was officially retired. Until the last direct deposit would include my hard-earned $127,000 retirement bonus. It wasn't a gift, it was part of a negotiated package written into my contract 10 years ago. I'd had a lawyer draft it myself. I wasn't dumb. But apparently, someone thought I was. My supervisor, Rick Doyle, wasn't in the trailer when I came in. That was unusual. He was always in early, lurking near the whiteboard, pretending he understood the numbers. He'd only been with the company 5 years, and he'd never liked how much the men trusted me over him. I didn't care. I wasn't in it for politics. I was there to get buildings finished on time and under budget. At 8:13 a.m., my company email pinged. Just a little chime. I clicked it open. Subject: Termination of employment. I stared at the screen. No salutation. No explanation. No meeting. Just a PDF letter, signed electronically by Rick Doyle and HR, stating that my employment was being terminated effective immediately. No cause listed. Just that, the company has decided to move in a different direction. 11 days short. No severance. No bonus. I blinked. Closed the email. Opened it again. It didn't change. I drove home. I didn't pack up my desk. I didn't call anyone. When I walked through the front door of our small Craftsman in the South Hill neighborhood of Spokane, my dog Bear, half lab, half collie, sensed something off and didn't greet me. My wife, Meredith, was in the kitchen, frowning at the stove like it had insulted her. She looked up. "You're home early." I said, "They fired me." She tilted her head. "Why?" "No reason. Just said they're moving in a different direction." She turned back to the stove without a word. That was the first moment I knew something was off. Meredith wasn't shocked. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even curious. She just nodded. By dinner, she had already pivoted the conversation to our lawn maintenance guy overcharging for sprinkler repair. She never asked about the bonus. About the betrayal. About what it meant for our future. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, counting rotations, my chest hollowed out with a kind of ache I hadn't felt since my father died. It wasn't just the money. It was the principle. The silence. The ease with which they cut me loose after nearly 4 decades. The way Meredith had barely blinked. The next morning, I began to take inventory of my life. I pulled out my employment contract from the fireproof box in my closet. Flipped to page 6, section 9C. It was still there in black and white. If employed with Granite Ridge Construction at the time of retirement at age 65, employee shall receive a one-time payment of $127,000, separate from pension or 401k, within 30 days of final workday. No clause about performance. No condition other than being actively employed. I was 10 days away from that finish line. But someone had decided I wouldn't reach it. What's more, someone knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random. It was surgical. Targeted. I didn't tell Meredith what I was planning. I didn't even tell my best friend Jeremy, who I'd worked beside for 20 years. I told no one. Because I knew if I stayed quiet, they would get sloppy. And if I was going to get my revenge, I needed them to think I was broken. Instead, I started taking notes. Time stamps. Emails. Old project records. Because Rick Doyle and whoever helped him, HR, upper management, maybe someone else, I was going to bury them. They had taken my bonus. I was going to take their careers. And Meredith, well, she was starting to look like a loose thread in this story. But I wouldn't pull on it. Not yet. I just wrote it down, 11 days before retirement. Meredith didn't flinch. I made a pot of coffee. Sat in my garage with Bear by my side. And I waited. Because sometimes, when a storm is coming, the smartest thing you can do is sit still, gather your strength. And build your firewood pile. After the termination email, everything in the house seemed louder. The creak of the kitchen floor. The drip of the bathroom sink. The slam of the mailbox. It wasn't grief. It was alertness. My brain was recording things, like it knew something was wrong before I could name it. I spent most of that first week in my garage. I had a small workbench and a space heater. Meredith barely noticed. She had her routines, morning coffee, midday errands, late-night reading. But those routines had shifted, subtly. Her phone was always face down now. Her laptop, previously left open on the dining room table, was always shut. She started sleeping on the far edge of the bed, as if I were contagious. There was no comfort. No check-ins. No curiosity. One morning, 3 days after the email, she stood by the kitchen window buttering toast. I watched her from the hallway. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her lips moved like she was mouthing lyrics. She didn't look like someone concerned that her husband had just lost his job and a 6-figure bonus. That evening, I checked the bank account. The joint checking was where most of our income and bills went. I had set it up that way decades ago for simplicity. But now, as I looked through the last month of transactions, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. 2 days before I was terminated, Meredith had transferred $7,200 from our joint account into an account I didn't recognize. Just a routing number. No label. And no reason. I opened a yellow legal pad. Wrote down the date and amount. Over the next 3 days, I found 2 more transfers, one for $4,100, another for $5,750. All just below the threshold that banks flag automatically. All initiated by her login. I didn't confront her. I didn't say anything. I opened a new checking account in my name only at a local credit union. Quietly transferred my pension distributions and Social Security payments. Left enough in the joint account to pay the bills so she wouldn't notice. She didn't. She stopped asking where I went during the day. That's because she assumed I had nowhere to go. But I had a new routine. I spent afternoons at the public library, researching employment law in Washington state. I found 3 documented cases where companies had terminated employees right before a contractual retirement bonus. All 3 won in court. 2 settled quietly. The third? The CEO was forced out after press coverage. At night, I returned home with coffee stains on my hands and old man fatigue in my bones. Meredith never asked about my day. She was too busy texting. One evening, I stepped out of the shower and heard her voice behind the bedroom door. The tone was soft, gentle, almost girlish. I froze. She said, "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too busy feeling sorry for himself." There was silence, then a laugh. Then, "Just a few more weeks and we can get out of this place." I didn't make a sound. I dried off, opened the door quietly, and walked to the kitchen. Sat there for 20 minutes until she came down. She didn't look startled. She kissed my head like I was a dog. I marked the time, 9:46 p.m. Added it to my notebook. The next day, I checked our phone bill online. We had a family plan with Verizon, same account for 20 years. She didn't know it logged call records. There was a number she'd been calling almost daily. Usually late at night, sometimes during her morning errands. Same area code, Spokane. I noted it down. I called it from a burner app while sitting in the Walmart parking lot. A man's voice answered, "This is Mark." That was all I needed. I drove home, walked Bear, and fed him dinner. Meredith was already in her pajamas, wine glass in hand, watching some cooking show she never used to like. She didn't look at me. Didn't ask how I was holding up. Didn't suggest calling HR or a lawyer. It was like the termination was convenient for her. Like the timeline was designed. Later that night, she placed her phone on the kitchen counter and went to the bathroom. I picked it up. It was locked, of course. But I noticed something: she'd changed her passcode. The old one had been my birthday. This one was 6 random digits I'd never seen. Bear whined softly at my feet. He knew something, too. I opened the trash can. Buried deep under coffee grounds and onion skins was a crumpled receipt from a hotel 2 hours away, Coeur d'Alene. 2 nights, Lakeview, king bed. The receipt had been printed 3 days before my termination. I ran the date through my notebook. That had been the weekend she said she was visiting her sister in Yakima. More lies. But I didn't confront her. Instead, I drove to that hotel the next day and asked the front desk if they could confirm who checked into that room. I said I was trying to locate a missing relative. The woman behind the desk said she couldn't give me names, but she hesitated when I showed her a photo of Meredith. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. I thanked her, walked out, and sat in my truck for an hour. She hadn't even tried to hide it well. Because she thought I was done. She thought firing me had broken something in me. She didn't know I had already spoken to a labor attorney. Didn't know I had printed every bank transaction. Didn't know I had photographs of the hotel receipt and a voicemail with her voice saying I didn't suspect a thing. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was preparing a case. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about theft. She'd taken my trust and used it to steal, not just money, but time. Years. Confidence. And that bonus wasn't just a number. It was my future. My daughter's college fund. My truck's final payment. The small cabin I wanted to fix up by Priest Lake. She wanted to leave. Fine. But she wouldn't walk away with half of everything. Not anymore. That night, I opened a document on my laptop. At the top, I wrote, "Chronology of events, Meredith, financial and emotional deception." It was time to build the file. The more I watched her, the more I understood how long this had been in motion. I wasn't just dealing with a sudden betrayal. This was a campaign. Timed. Coordinated. Polished. Meredith had been laying bricks on a path out of our marriage long before my termination letter came through. And whoever Mark was, he'd helped her lay them. It became clear through small details. Receipts I hadn't noticed before. A second key on her ring she never explained. That new blouse I thought she'd bought for our anniversary dinner. She wore it to Coeur d'Alene. I matched it to a photo from the hotel's Instagram feed, the bar in the lobby, blurry figures in the background. But even from a distance, I recognized her frame. The tilt of her head. What she didn't know is that I had started capturing everything. Screenshots. Bank logs. Phone records. I even installed a motion-sensitive camera above the garage. Disguised in a birdhouse I hollowed out over 2 afternoons. If she was sneaking anyone into our house, I'd know. Then came the credit card charges. One morning, I checked our joint card out of habit. I hadn't used it since the firing. Meredith had a lot. $684, women's clothing boutique in downtown Spokane. $432, upscale seafood place I'd never been to. $1,120, a jeweler, also downtown. And 2 charges that told me everything. $260, a motorcycle gear shop. $4,700, a used Harley-Davidson, registered 2 days later under the name Mark Ellis. She hadn't just spent money. She'd helped buy him a bike. She was building a life with him. On my dime. On my watch. I didn't cancel the card. Not yet. I needed the paper trail. Instead, I drove to the Department of Licensing. Asked a buddy who still worked there to check the registration logs for Mark Ellis. Told him I suspected identity theft. He found the record. I asked him to print it. The address wasn't far, just north of Riverfront Park. An apartment complex. 2nd floor. I didn't drive by. I didn't knock. I didn't tail them. I didn't need to. I had enough. What mattered more now was what she was hiding in our own home. That evening, after she left to run errands, I went into her closet. Not the one in our bedroom, the guest room one she had slowly claimed over the last year. I looked for anything she'd be stupid enough to leave behind. It didn't take long. Behind a stack of scarves and a travel bag she rarely used, I found a manila envelope. Inside, printed statements. Password lists. Notes with dates and dollar amounts in her handwriting. She had been planning a separation. Financially. The document titled Timeline, Transition Plan had bullet points. March 2nd, move savings to independent account. March 5th, close joint fidelity investment account. March 8th, finalize meeting with estate lawyer, Mark's contact. March 12th, serve notice, file under abandonment grounds. March 14th, sell cabin lot, listed under both names. March 21st, leave Spokane. It was a calendar. One that ended with her gone. Me left behind. Bonus stolen. Accounts bled dry. I took photos of every page. Put the envelope back exactly how I found it. Then I checked our Fidelity account. Gone. The $86,000 we'd saved over a decade, cashed out 5 days prior. Her login. A wire to a new investment firm I'd never heard of. I wrote it down. Screenshot the log. The bank confirmed it in a call later that week. The funds were moved under her name only. I asked about recourse. They said I'd need a lawyer. I already had one. I returned to my notes. Updated the timeline. Added a second folder on my laptop titled, Joint Asset Violations, March. The screenshots, dates, account numbers, and emails all live there now. That night, I found a receipt on the kitchen counter. Meredith was careless now. She thought I'd stopped looking. It was from a real estate office. A consultation fee, $3.50. Agent name, Deborah Swain. Property listed, Mountain View Lot, Priest Lake. Our cabin lot. She was trying to sell it out from under me. The deed was in both names. Always had been. We bought it 14 years ago after a road trip. She cried when we signed the papers. Called it our forever plan. You'll build it, she'd said. I'll fill it with memories. Now she was selling it to fund a getaway. I emailed Deborah Swain. Said I was a co-owner. That the property couldn't be sold without my notarized consent. She replied the next day. I apologize, I was unaware the property wasn't solely under Mrs. Dwyer's name. We will suspend all proceedings until this is resolved. I saved the email. The next morning, Meredith was making pancakes. She said, I was thinking we could go out this weekend. Clear our heads. Just us. I nodded. Said I'd think about it. Watched her flip a pancake with a smirk like nothing had happened. Like the betrayal wasn't already flooding every corner of our home. She was performing normal. But she wasn't good at it. She still left her burner phone in her purse. She still used the same coffee mug Mark had bought her, it had his initials. I looked them up online, make every risk count. A biking quote. That's what they were doing, betting that I was too broken to react. They were wrong. Later that afternoon, I found an email in her inbox she hadn't logged out of. It was buried under her spam folder, saved as a draft. To be filed if he resists. Attached, a prepared petition for divorce. Grounds, abandonment and incompatibility. Filed in a different county, so I wouldn't be notified immediately. In it, she listed the house, truck, and remaining accounts, all under her claims. I printed it. Filed it in the red folder I'd started marking preemptive claims. Because she was escalating. Which meant I would too. But not with yelling. Not with threats. I had a different plan. It's one thing to suspect betrayal. It's another to prove it and prepare for the storm it's dragging behind it. That week, I accepted that Meredith was gone. Not physically yet, but emotionally, financially, legally. What was left of our marriage was a facade, one she'd kept up just long enough to siphon money, conceal intentions, and position herself for a clean exit. But exits, like buildings, have blueprints. And I had hers. With the divorce petition draft, the timeline, the hidden accounts, and the attempted property sale, I knew the arc of her plan. But understanding wasn't enough. I needed leverage. Documentation. Legal clarity. I met my attorney again, Norman Gallows, a quiet man with heavy glasses and heavier silence. I showed him the documents I'd compiled. He didn't blink. Just said, "She's going to file first. We're going to beat her to it. And she's going to wish she never tried to sell that lot." Over the next 2 weeks, Norman and I built a counter case. It was more than just financial protection. It was a preemptive strike. We filed an official notice with the county assessor's office to freeze the title transfer of the Priest Lake property. That required Meredith's notarized consent to lift. It wouldn't sell. Not without a court fight. I also signed a document revoking joint banking access and filed a fraud notice with our financial institutions. The moment her divorce filing was official, all pending transactions would be flagged. She would feel the walls close in slowly. Back home, I installed another camera, this time in the basement. She had taken to going down there on phone calls. I wired it into my laptop. No cloud, no app, just a local drive only I accessed. I wasn't hoping to catch a scandal. I was building a case. Every small move was a brick in the wall I was building around my assets. Bear, my dog, stayed by my side more often now. He didn't go to her anymore. Animals know. They always know. The most delicate piece was my employment case. I met with a labor investigator who had previously worked with the Washington State Attorney General's office. I handed her the termination letter, my contract, the date of the firing, the bonus clause, and a printed record of internal emails between Rick Doyle and HR, ones I had quietly archived over the last decade. One stood out. It was dated 6 weeks before my firing. Rick had written, "If Dwyer retires in March, that's a $127,000 hit. Isn't there any way to phase him out before then?" The investigator looked up, blinked slowly, and said, "They're cooked." I wasn't planning on just getting my bonus back. I wanted Rick out. I wanted his name to burn in HR circles from Seattle to Boise. But first, I needed the right moment. At home, Meredith's mask started to slip. She became more polite. Stilted. She asked if I wanted to talk about the future. I played along. Said maybe we needed a vacation. She smiled, as if relieved. As if her plan was back on track. She didn't know that her access to our accounts had already been revoked. She didn't know that I'd opened a quiet line of credit in my name only. That I'd transferred half the home equity into a protected trust, legally allowable when one party is preparing for litigation and can prove spousal fraud. I had surveillance, documentation, legal filings, asset freezes, and a digital footprint that told the story of a woman building a false narrative of abandonment while draining our life piece by piece. She thought she was acting in the shadows. She didn't know I was the one turning off the lights. I changed the locks on the garage and moved all my tools into a locked storage pod. Every file I owned, financial, legal, personal, was removed from the house. I replaced our router and encrypted the Wi-Fi. I disabled her access to our shared Google account and quietly transferred ownership of all documents to a private, offline drive. That weekend, she tried to log in to pay a credit card bill. I watched from the hallway as she sat at the kitchen table, refreshing the screen over and over, then flipping open her phone with a frown. She didn't ask me about it. She just poured another glass of wine. Meanwhile, I compiled a 56-page file titled, Pre-Filing Evidence, Dwyer vs. Dwyer. Every transaction she made, every call, every forged document, every dishonest correspondence, documented, dated, notarized. Then I gave Norman the green light. He filed for divorce first. Grounds: marital fraud, financial deception, asset misappropriation. Included in the motion: emergency stay on asset transfers, pending full investigation. The county clerk accepted the motion on a Thursday. By Friday morning, Meredith was served, at home, in her robe, sipping tea by the window. She opened the envelope with one hand, the other still holding her phone. She didn't say a word. She walked upstairs, quietly. I didn't follow. I went to the garage, patted Bear on the head, and sat in silence. My hands were steady. My breathing slow. The first battle was mine. Quietly, legally, without chaos. She had escalated. I had outmaneuvered. I'd filed first. That gave me control. But exposing the full extent of the fraud, that was still unfolding. Meredith hadn't said much after being served. She kept her distance, like someone living in a house that no longer recognized her. She didn't ask questions. Didn't scream. Didn't deny. That told me she understood what she was up against. But I wasn't done. Not with her. And not with Rick Doyle. I drove down to the labor investigator's office with a USB drive full of files, recordings, email exports, screen captures. Everything to prove that my firing wasn't just untimely. It was deliberate. Rick had coordinated it with HR to avoid paying the retirement clause. And based on one buried email chain I'd found, he may have falsified documentation to justify it. The key evidence came from an internal memo, dated 2 days before I was fired. It read, "We need a paper trail suggesting underperformance. Use the job site delay last fall. Reframe it as mismanagement." But the delay wasn't my fault. It was due to late delivery of steel from a supplier Rick had insisted on using, a cheaper contractor from Idaho who failed inspection twice. The memo was signed by Rick and forwarded to HR. The investigator read it 3 times. Said, "This is actionable. It's not just wrongful termination. It's contract fraud." She forwarded everything to the state labor board. I asked if I needed to testify. She said not yet. Back home, I reviewed the security footage from the garage camera. What I found wasn't shocking, but it confirmed what I already suspected. One evening, while I was supposedly out getting groceries, Meredith had taken a box from her closet to the garage and hidden it under the false panel near the water heater. I knew the spot. I'd built it myself years ago as a dry hideaway for tools. When she left for errands the next day, I opened it. Inside, a burner phone, an external hard drive, and a black notebook filled with notes about financial transfers, private messages between her and Mark, and outlines of how to claim I had abandoned the marriage. There was even a reference to prepping evidence, which meant she was willing to fabricate history to tilt a judge's opinion. One line stood out: "He's old school. He won't fight. He'll leave the house." I scanned the entire notebook. Printed the most damaging pages. Then I opened the hard drive. What I saw changed everything. Dozens of scanned documents, bank transfers, emails, even a few digital forms she had filled out in my name. One, in particular, caught my attention: an amended beneficiary designation form for my life insurance policy. Dated January 14th. Digitally signed. But I hadn't signed it. She'd replaced my signature. Changed the beneficiary from my daughter Emily, my child from a previous marriage, to herself. The signature was neat. Accurate. But I'd never authorized it. It was forgery. I took that file straight to Norman. He looped in a criminal defense specialist and forwarded the document to the Spokane County Fraud Division. It was identity theft. Clear, deliberate, and traceable. They opened a case that afternoon. Meanwhile, Meredith tried to stay calm. She still moved through the house like it belonged to her, but her eyes were different. She was looking for cracks in the floor. A few days later, she got a certified letter, notice from the labor board that they'd accepted my wrongful termination claim and were launching a formal audit into Granite Ridge Construction. She didn't ask what it was. But I saw her face when she read the envelope. It wasn't concern. It was fear. She knew Rick Doyle was involved. That night, I got a call from Jeremy, my old coworker at Granite Ridge. He said, "There's a rumor going around. Rick's been placed on leave. HR's in panic mode." I didn't respond. I just thanked him. 2 mornings later, Rick showed up at my house. He stood outside the front door like a man who had lost control of the narrative. He said, "Let's talk." I didn't invite him in. He said, "This is a misunderstanding. HR, there was pressure from above." I said, "You forged a case file." He opened his mouth. Closed it. I said, "Walk away, Rick. You're not talking your way out of this one." He left without another word. That afternoon, Meredith tried to play peacemaker. She said, "Maybe we rushed into things. Maybe we can talk." I didn't answer. Just watched her pack her gym bag like it was a normal day. She left for an appointment. Never said where. When she came back, the locks were changed. A sheriff's deputy served her the emergency order Norman had filed, exclusive residence rights granted to me by the court, based on suspected fraud and forged documents. She stood on the porch. Didn't cry. Didn't yell. She said, "You don't have to do this." I didn't answer. Behind the deputy, Bear sat by the door, ears back. She left. Inside, I gathered the rest of the files. Labeled everything by date and category. Sent duplicates to Norman and the fraud division. I had all I needed now: proof of deceit, digital forgery, financial theft, and conspiracy. It was no longer a matter of divorce. It was a matter of law. The machine had been set in motion. My filing had triggered investigations, and the evidence had been distributed to the right hands. I wasn't chasing revenge. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in consequences, measured, permanent, and quiet enough to look like fate. The first knock came 3 weeks after Meredith had been served. It was 7:48 a.m. 2 plainclothes investigators from the Spokane County Financial Crimes Division stepped onto the porch. I watched from the window as they showed their badges to Meredith, who had returned briefly to gather personal items under court supervision. She looked at the papers. Then she looked up at the street. There was no crowd. No neighbors. No drama. Just a simple, quiet exposure of the truth. She was being investigated for identity theft, wire fraud, and falsifying legal documents, including the forged life insurance beneficiary form. She wasn't arrested that day. But they left her with a summons. She didn't speak a word to me. Just got in her car and drove away. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer and the investigator handling the employment fraud case. The Labor Board had completed their internal audit. What they found was staggering. Not only had Rick Doyle conspired to terminate me to avoid paying out the bonus, but he had done so while redirecting budget line items to personal accounts. One of the subcontractor payments had gone to a shell company Rick owned under his cousin's name. It had nothing to do with me. They just used me as the distraction. The board filed a formal complaint to the state attorney general. By the end of the week, Rick was arrested and charged with embezzlement, wrongful termination, and fraud. I read about it on the local news site that Thursday evening. Granite Ridge supervisor arrested in fraud probe. Ongoing investigation into alleged bonus evasion scheme. They didn't name me. But I didn't need them to. Jeremy called the next morning. He said, "They're cleaning house. HR director resigned. They're asking about old projects. They want a list of everything Rick touched." I provided a full dossier to the investigator, who passed it along to the AG's office. I didn't embellish. I didn't speculate. Just facts, dates, and documents. 2 weeks later, I received notice that Granite Ridge was offering a full settlement of my bonus, plus an additional $30,000 in damages to avoid litigation. I signed, under the condition that Rick's name be included in the formal complaint record. They agreed. That same week, the Financial Crimes Unit subpoenaed records from the investment firm Meredith had used to move our joint funds. They were cooperative. The funds had not yet been moved offshore. Most of it was still traceable. The firm froze the accounts. Norman filed a motion with the divorce court to classify those funds as marital property obtained through fraud. The judge granted it. The funds would be returned to the marital estate pending division. Meredith, meanwhile, was struggling to retain legal counsel. She'd hired an estate attorney, Mark's contact, but he withdrew after reviewing the charges. She filed for a continuance. It was denied. The judge's tone was crisp in the hearing: "This court does not reward deception. You are not the victim here." Mark Ellis, her partner, received a cease and desist order related to his involvement in attempting to sell property he had no legal claim to. His motorcycle, purchased partially with funds from our joint account, was seized as part of asset recovery. They weren't arrested. But they were marked. Their names appeared in court records. Their finances were under scrutiny. Their plans, built in shadows, were dragged into the light. And the house? The court granted me full ownership, citing my premarital contributions, ongoing maintenance, and Meredith's financial misconduct. She was ordered to vacate all claims. Bear and I stayed. The day she officially signed the quitclaim deed, she stood on the porch one last time. She said, "You won." I didn't reply. She said, "You didn't have to destroy everything." Still, I said nothing. Because it wasn't about destruction. It was about consequence. She walked away. No suitcase. No tears. Just silence and the slow realization that she had built her exit on a foundation that didn't hold. 3 days later, I got the final confirmation email from the Labor Board. Rick Doyle had pled guilty to falsifying employee performance records and using his position for financial gain. He lost his license. Would not be employed in construction management again. A quiet bar. Not a headline. But a career killer. I forwarded the email to Norman. Then I closed my laptop and took Bear for a walk through Lincoln Park. The air smelled like pine and wet soil. It was overcast. Quiet. Peaceful. The house was quiet now. My account secure. My future, intact. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene. But justice, when you build it right, speaks loud enough on its own. The house was quiet now. Not empty, just clean of noise. Clean of pretense. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm when everything still holds. No more low murmurs from the basement. No phones turned face down on the counter. Just Bear's steady breathing by the fireplace and the rhythmic hum of the HVAC kicking on against the Spokane winter chill. I'd kept the thermostat set low since Meredith left. Habit, I guess. But the silence was warm in its own way. No more lies masquerading as comfort. Just reality. And peace. The last piece of the court process came through a certified envelope the second week of March, the finalized divorce decree. My attorney had reviewed it already. No objections. The judge granted me the house, sole ownership of the cabin property, and restoration of all diverted marital assets, minus a portion Meredith was allowed to keep as part of a court-defined, non-contested concession. I didn't fight that. I wasn't out to leave her penniless. I just wasn't going to let her walk away clean after trying to dismantle my life behind my back. The restitution order tied to her financial fraud was separate. She was required to pay back the siphoned funds over a 3-year period under court supervision. Not a crushing sentence. But a long enough leash that she'd feel the tension every time she thought about starting over. The criminal charges were still moving forward. I hadn't asked for prison. But the law moved at its own pace, and the DA had enough to continue, at least on the forged signature for the insurance policy. I'd signed an affidavit. Testified via written statement. That was all they needed. Rick Doyle, meanwhile, had accepted a plea deal. No jail time, but his career was finished. The settlement from Granite Ridge had been wired to my new account. The check came with no note. No apology. Just a transaction code and a confirmation number. That was enough. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. Not even Emily, my daughter. She called every Sunday, and I answered the same way each time, steady, calm, with no trace of what had unfolded. I didn't want her to carry that weight. Someday, I might tell her. Not today. Instead, I built a routine. Morning started with Bear's walk along the Centennial Trail. The path stretched clean along the river, the trees bending in quiet salute as we passed. Sometimes I'd bring a thermos and sit by the water, let the cold sink in, remind myself I was still here. Still standing. Afternoons were spent on the cabin lot at Priest Lake. I'd hauled up the tools I'd once feared I'd lose. The plans I'd sketched years ago on a napkin were finally pinned to the wall of a small storage shed I'd built beside the clearing. I took my time. Framed out the footprint with string. Laid markers where the deck would face the lake. It was quiet work. Honest work. I wasn't running from anything. I was building something new. The divorce, finalized. The accounts, secure. The bonus, recovered. But more than that, the dignity I thought I'd lost, that silent inner armor I'd spent a lifetime forging, hadn't broken. It had just been buried under shock. Under betrayal. Now it was back. Sharpened. A few weeks later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check, $1,200, and a note. This is all I can offer. I know it's not enough. I didn't cash it. I didn't respond. I stored it in the back of a drawer, next to the old lease for the cabin lot and a photo of me, Bear, and Emily from 5 years ago. It was never about the money. Meredith had made her choices. So had I. There's no pleasure in revenge. Not the kind people think. There's no moment of triumph, no swelling music. There's just a return to balance. A setting down of weights that never belonged to you. One day, I received a call from the labor board. They asked if I'd be willing to sit on a panel for retired professionals who'd faced wrongful termination and could offer insight into employment reform legislation. I agreed. Quietly. Anonymously. The moderator said, "You're calm about it all. Most people are angry." I said, "Anger burns out. Quiet lasts." When I returned home that evening, I sat on the back steps and watched the sky turn to ash over the treeline. Bear lay beside me, head heavy on my boot. I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt clean. That's the thing about betrayal, it hollows you at first. But if you endure, if you don't scream, if you simply act, there's something left after the fire. Something still whole. Sometimes, it's stronger than before.